Okay, thank you very much. Let's continue now. We're looking at elements of poetry. So we've talked about the simile, the metaphor, personification, and I've said that you need to actually read around that and see all these other elements, including the, what do you call this? Personification, apostrophe. Yeah, so there are many, metonymy, allegory, there are just many. So just read on elements of poetry. I'll get into that because I want us to get into understanding poetry. So from there, then there are other elements such as sound elements. Because of sound elements, I encourage you to listen to the poem. So the poem should be read out aloud because there are certain sounds that come from it. So you need to hear these sounds, okay? And one of the elements of poetry, the sound elements particularly, is the rhyme. The rhyme is what almost everyone knows. Almost everyone talks about rhyme. Almost everyone who tries to write poetry, tries to rhyme because they think that rhyme is everything in the poem. Of course, it is not. It is just a tiny element. And actually, for Zambian poets, my suggestion has always been do not rhyme because rhyme has made people end up writing what is not necessary at all. They end up going off topic just because they want to rhyme. But rhyme is one of the poems, and basically it occurs in places where we have accentuated syllables, okay? Accentuated syllables carrying the same vowel sound. So when we have the same vowel sound, it usually occurs at the end of the poem. So at the end of the poem, you have sounds that are the same, okay? It will sound the same, then you know that actually that is rhyme, though that is called end rhyme, while internal rhyme occurs within the poem, right? So Shakespeare, for instance, uses end rhyme through and through in his poem. So at the end of the poem, you're able to hear the sounds. So if you look at that sonnet by Shakespeare, sonnet 18, he says, "Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Thou art more lovely and more temperate. Rough winds do shake the darling buds of May, and summer's lease hath all too short a date." So you will notice here that day rhymes with May, while temperate rhymes with the date. Okay, so that's the style. So here it's Shakespeare uses A B C D C D E F E F G G. So the next part of the sonnet says, "Sometimes too hot the eye of heaven shines, and often is his complexion dimmed, and every fair from fair sometimes declines by chance or nature's changing course untrimmed." So you see, shines, declines, dimmed, and trimmed. It says, "But thy eternal summer shall not fade, nor lose possession of that fair thou owest, nor shall death brag thou wanderest in his shade, when in eternal lines to time thou growest." So we have fade and shade, ost and grossed. And then the last one is that one now is a couplet. It gives the same sound. Now it says, "So long as men can breathe or eyes can see, so long lives this, and this gives life to thee." So we have thee rhyming with see. So that's what happens. So at the end, you have words that sound the same. The same can be said about Edgar Allan Poe. He says, "Once upon a midnight dream, while I pondered weak and weary over many a quaint and curious volume of forgotten lore, while I nodded, nearly napping, suddenly there came a tapping, as of someone gently rapping at my chamber door. 'Tis some visitor," I muttered, tapping at my chamber door. "Only this and nothing more." So you see, we have dreary and weary in the same line. Then we have law at the end, which goes with door, and more. And then in the third line, we have napping and tapping. And it's the same thing. Then in the fourth line, we have rapping. So napping, tapping, rapping. That's the same sound. And we have tapping in the 5th line, and more in the last line, the 6th line, which rhymes with do, do, lo. And when you get to actually this particular line, lo, do, do, and more, is a line you will see, is the rhyme you will see occurring through and through this particular poem. So this poem is there on and on. For instance, we get the second stanza. Says, distinctly I remember it was in the bleak December, and each separate dying ember wrought its ghost upon the floor. Eagerly I wished the more of any I had sought to borrow from my book, Cesses of Sorrow, sorrow for the lost Lenore, for the rare and radiant maiden, whom the angels name Lenore, nameless here for evermore. So you see, remember, which is on in the first line, rhymes with ember, which is in the second line, within. So this is internal, okay? While the ones that are at the end, these are called end rhymes. So there is rhyme. I don't like paying so much attention to this, but as you read poetry, pay attention to this rhyme. And you should be able to tell whether the rhyme is deliberate or is coincidental. And as you read, for instance, poems that are in free verse are those poems that do not, that are not really restricted by meter or, by meter or even by rhyme. Those are free. Like the one we're looking at right now, Somehow We Survive by Deadness Brutus. Says, somehow we survive and tenderness frustrated does not wither. Investigating searchlights wreck our naked and protected contours. Over our heads, the monolithic decalogue of fascist prohibition glowers and titters for a catastrophic fall. Boots club the peeling door, but somehow we survive severance, deprivation, and loss. Patrols uncoil along the asphalt dark, hissing their menace to our lives. Most cruel, our land is scarred with terror, rendered unlovely and unlovable. Sundered are we and our passionate surrender, but somehow tenderness survives. This one is free verse. It is free verse, there is no rhyme, but still we'll get back to it and see what separates it from this and what still makes it a successful poem, regardless of the fact that there's no rhyme. So we have poems that have rhyme and poems that don't have rhyme, yet they're still successful. But then the other thing is, apart from the fact that these poems have rhyme, you notice that they also have what we call alliteration. Well, that is my personal favorite. In poetry, the sound that I love the most is alliteration, okay? I think that should be the 6th stanza. Alliteration basically is the sound, okay? It's a case where we have the same consonant sound being repeated in lines that are near each other. Okay, so those lines that are near each other have, this sound being repeated, the consonant sound. It occurs at the beginning of words that are near each other. Now, at the beginning of these words, we have the same consonant sound. That is what gives us alliteration. Okay. Actually, we had it in the very first verse. If you look at the first stanza, once upon a midnight dreary, why upon that weekend weary, over many a quaint and curious volume of forgotten lore. So we have quaint and curious. That is the same sound. I'm sure you heard what I said. I said sound. Quaint and curious both begin with the same sound, and that is the k sound. Okay? So we have the same sound. So it's not the same letter. So do not worry about the letters. That's why I said you need to listen to the poem. Okay? Here in the second stanza, we have, from my book, cesses of sorrow, sorrow for the lost Lenore. You can see that there is a repetition of the S sound. And it's the same thing we find, in the third line. I mean, the fifth line says, for the rare and radiant maiden. Okay, rare and radiant. So still we have that, okay? And here we have the F sound in the third stanza, the second line, thrilled me, filled me with fantastic terrors never felt before. But here in the last word before, the sound is in the word. So if we have this sound occurring within or at the end of the word, we call it consonance. But where it's occurring at the beginning of the word, and it's in words that are near each other, especially in the same line, that is alliteration. And it produces a very beautiful musical arrangement, okay? Tis some visitor entreating entrance. So you see that is the same sound. So Edgar Allan Poe, particularly in this poem, The Raven, paid very close attention to sound. Very close attention. Then if you look at this one, actually this one I was looking for. Now just listen very carefully. Just listen as I read it. Deep into that darkness, peering, long I stood there wondering, fearing, doubting, dreaming dreams no mortal ever dared to dream before. But the silence was unbroken and the stillness gave no token. And the only word there spoken was the whispered word, Lenore. This I whispered, and an echo murmured back the word, Lenore. Merely this and nothing more. Now look at the repetition of the D sound. Okay, the D sound has been very well, repeated, because this is a dark poem. And this stanza is equally very, very dark. It says, deep into that darkness, peering, long I stood there wondering and fearing, doubting, dreaming dreams no mortal ever dared to dream before. You see, so here we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 words that begin with the letter D. Doubting, dreaming dreams no mortal ever dared to dream before. That's really brilliant, okay? Very brilliant. Very few people are able to put it that way. So when you see that, you can see, just how brilliant Edgar Allan Poe is in terms of the use of sounds in his poetry. So he's able to very cleverly place these sounds there to add to the meaning of his work. Then we also have assonance. Assonance basically is the repetition of, these are vowel sounds in words that are near each other. So while we're talking about consonant sounds in the earlier case of alliteration, here we're talking about vowel sounds, okay? But the silence was unbroken and the stillness gave no token. So you have O, A, and the only word spoken, okay, only word spoken is the whispered word Lenore. So we have O. The sound keeps on, the sound keeps on appearing. And as you read through this poem, you find that he has done that very well, because it says, deep into that darkness, peering, long there stood wondering, fearing, doubting, dreaming dreams no mortal ever dared to dream before. So E. So we have all this sound, alliteration, consonance, assonance, rhyme, all these sound patterns, packed within the same poem. It is the use of these that contributes to the success of a poem. So initially we talked about the language, the use of figurative language. And then this use of figurative language married with the use of sound patterns, that is what creates poetry. That is what makes poetry, successful. Not those poems that I have seen that you write sometimes for your students so that they can share, on Independence Day or World AIDS Day. AIDS, AIDS, you have killed my mother, you have killed my father, thank you. Honestly, what are you trying to do? Try to spend extra time. When you write your poem, if there are any writers, you finish writing it, put it aside, have some time, get back to it. See what you have done and what you haven't done. Pay attention to sounds. How have these sounds been arranged? How metaphorical is this poem? Personally, I do not respect any poem that is just all straightforward. No, I expect you to do a little more work. Ensure that you have these sounds. Ensure that you have this language that really takes it there. But above all, what is important when we interact with poetry? Yes, these that I've mentioned are very important. But our first point in poetry, as I mentioned earlier, is that we have to read the poem. Remember that? We have to read the poem. Read the poem. And not once, but as many times as you can. And as you are reading the poem, what you are trying to ask yourself is, who is speaking in this poem? Who is speaking in this poem? You should be able to identify. I'm not interested in you saying it is Peter. No. We need you to describe the speaker in the poem. Describe the speaker. So as you read the poem, listen very carefully to what is being said. Here, Dennis Brutus says, somehow we survive, and tenderness, frustrated, does not wither. Investigating searchlights wreck our naked and protected contours. Over our heads, the monolithic decalogue of fascist prohibition glowers and treat us for a catastrophic fall. Boots clap the peeling door, but somehow we survive severance, deprivation, loss. Patrols and call along the asphalt dark hissing their menace to our lives. Most cruel, all our land is scarred with terror. You see, so the moment you hear certain words, terror, rendered unlovely and unlovable, so it's not beautiful and it can't be loved. Thundered are we and all our passionate surrender, but somehow tenderness survives. So there's still those that are good. So when you pay attention, you listen, you can still see, the use of words like fascist. You can tell the kind of environment this is happening in, because you should be able to see, where is this happening? So the mentioning of fascist, you'll say, okay, what is this? And if you know, of course, the background, said Dennis Brutus is South African, then you say, okay, this could have been during the apartheid, regime. So this is someone who is not happy with, the environment, and we can see searchlights always searching for people. Say, okay, these searchlights, it could be actually a prison. So you pay attention, you listen, because you need to see where it is happening. In short, there is a message. So we start with who is speaking in the poem. Let's listen to Ole Shoyinka. Ole Shoyinka says, the price seemed unreasonable. Okay, the title of the poem is Telephone Conversation. The price seemed unreasonable, location indifferent. The landlady swore she lived off premises. Nothing remained but self-confession. Madam, I warned, I hate a wasted journey. I'm an African. Silence. Silenced transmission of pressurized good breeding. Voice, when it came, lipstick coated, long gold rod, cigarette holder piped. What eye was foully? How dark? I had not misheard. Are you light or very dark? Button B, button A. Hinge of rancid breath of public hide and seek and speak. Red Bulls. red pillar box, red double-tiered omnibus scorching tire. It was real. Shamed by ill-mannered silence, surrender, pushed dumbfounded to beg simplification. Considerate she was, varying the emphasis. Are you dark or very light? Revelation came. You mean like plain or milk chocolate? Her accent was clinical, crushing in its light impersonality. Rapidly wavelength adjusted, I chose West African sepia, and as an afterthought, down in my passport, silence for spectroscopic flight of fancy, till truthfulness clanged her accent hard on the mouthpiece. What's that? Conceding, don't know what that is. Like brunette. That's dark, isn't it? Not altogether facially. I'm brunette. But madame, you should see the rest of me. Palm of my hand, soles of my feet are a peroxide blonde. Friction caused foolishly, sorry, friction caused foolishly, madame, by sitting down has turned my bottom raven black. One moment, madame, sensing her receiver rearing to the thunderclap. About my ears. Madame, I pleaded, would you rather see for yourself? Okay, it says telephone conversation. So when you listen to this poem, you can tell because it says, no, it says the price seemed unreasonable, location indifferent. The landlady saw she lived off premises. Then you know, okay, so this is about, rent. Someone trying, to rent an apartment, okay? Possibly not here, all right? But, well, since Wole Soyinka was in Europe, this could have been England, and most likely England. So from that we can tell, all right? We can tell where it is happening, who it is. And it is a landlady, it is a white person. And we can see just how this black person is being treated by this white woman, a landlady, how he's being looked at, being black, what she thinks of him. And she's even interested in how black, how black he is. So it's like, that means something, to her. Is he very black? Or there's still some lightness in him? Meaning, she would rather it was a white person. So these are things that we need to see. Okay, this is something we have to, to identify in the poem. So what does it mean? So what is this poem talking about? What is being talked about? What is the message? Okay, what really is it all about? I think those are the questions that we have to pay attention to. Those are the questions we have to pay attention to, because what we want is to understand the poem. So we listen to the words. But it's not just about understanding this poem, it is also about enjoying the beauty of the poem. I think that is what I mentioned earlier. The poem is meant to be enjoyed. It is beautiful. Being beautiful, it has to be enjoyed. We have to go with it. We have to move with it. We have to be part of it. That's our role, to enjoy it. And it's been argued by many people that the first thing you should do is understand it. So as you are reading, I said, read as many times as possible, remember? So read through as many times as possible so that you get an idea of what is being talked about, who is speaking there, what is happening, what are they talking about, and where is this happening? So have this general understanding. But ultimately, listen to the beauty of the poem. That's very important. Listen to the beauty of the poem because you're supposed to enjoy it. The selection of words, the use of language, all that is important when someone chooses to use the best words. Okay? For instance, says Dennis Brutus, it says, boots club the peeling door. You can see these people who are doing that, and you can see what the door looks like. And the boots are not hitting them, but they're clubbing it. So, you see, the words that are being selected are very, very careful. Very carefully selected words. There's rendered unlovely and unlovable. Two different words, very different, sounding almost the same. And one would think that they mean the same thing, but they mean different things. Okay? So our land has turned out to be unlovely and unlovable. It's not good and it can't be loved. That's how it has been made. That's what has happened, okay, to our land, because our land is scarred with terror. Look at the use of words that this poet, chooses. Very beautiful words. Okay, at this time I'll ask for comments because there's something that I want to talk to very briefly before we end the lecture. I think we won't go beyond this. So I'll ask for only 3 comments and only by raising your hand. So please raise your hand if you want to say something. Then you make your brief comment so that I finally talk about reading, how we are going to read, apart from what we have just shared. So please raise your hand before you speak, because I want only 3 people to speak before I bring in the final part of this lecture, which will be how to read the poem. Not the poem, how to read. So Chanda, you are first. Who is next? Just wait. Enoch. I want to see all the 3 who have something to say before we can start talking. So Enoch is first. The second is Wilson. Okay. Do we have another? We have another speaker? Okay, we have only Enoch and Wilson. So only 2 will speak, and okay. The third one is Grace. All right, so Enoch, Wilson, and Grace will share their views. Then we proceed now to reading literature. So that particular part of the discussion will be on all the 3 genres of literature, just in case you don't discuss them with your lecturer. Okay, yes, Enoch, you can speak now.
I just want to, are you getting me? Are you getting me?
Yes, we can get you, Mr. Chanda.
I first of all want to appreciate this lecture, that it has really opened my mind, because I've never done literature before, but I'm able to follow it nicely and understand certain things. But I still want to agree with you that literature, in whatever ways I can explain it, it's a language. And having said that, I've realized that poems, like the way we are doing them at school, especially at primary level, I think we are just writing rhymes, not poems, because they have no meaning whatsoever, like you had alluded to. But having gone through this lecture, I'm there to appreciate that it should have meaning, and at the end of the day, the lesson should be dictated from any poem that you listen to or you write to the pupils. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Wilson, next.
Well, thank you. I think it's in line with what Mr. Chanda was saying.
Okay.
From what you've just told us, I think for one to appreciate the poem, there is need to read it completely. Just from the first verses you gave us when starting the lesson, like here a pretty baby lies, sung asleep with lullabies. When you end there, if you don't go up to the end, you'll get the wrong thing, like it was explained earlier. So there's need to read the poem fully so that you can understand. So I was just trying to compare what you just from telling us, like you can read even more than 3 times. And I was also comparing to that story which I read from the materials I given, the 6 blind men and the elephant. Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Grace.
Actually, never mind. I had a question, but I've since forgotten. Sorry.
Okay, all right.
I'll ask later when I remember. But
Okay, we can barely hear that part. No, that can't be heard at all. Okay, so I think,
a question about poetry.
sorry? No, your line is not working. I think you can still ask the question later. Okay, so now I want to talk about reading in general. This one basically refers to everything. I just want you to know what you can look for in a literary piece of work. As you are reading anything, a story, a poem, a play, the questions you should be asking, or you could be asking, will be like just what we're talking about. For instance, what kind of language has been used in this poem or in this story, in this play? Okay. For instance, we talked about free verse. You could say it's Bemba, it's English, it's Nyanja, it's Tonga. You could mention any of the languages, then say this language seems to be very odd, or it comes from that, or this language is very informal, it is formal. You can see all that, and there are reasons why it appears the way it appears. Then apart from that, you could look at how historical the work is. To what extent is this work historical? Okay, does it really represent where it is coming from? Does it? Also, that's one of the issues that you could deal with. Is it historical? Then what does it deal with? The human being psychology, what people are thinking about. Can we read it from the thinking of the person? Can we say this story represents the thinking of the writer? Or does this story represent the experiences of the writer? So we could have all those questions within the work. Or does this work somehow speaks against the status quo, the political or the rich people, how the rich treat others in society? Would this work be interested in that? Is it Marxist in nature or what? So could this work, be interested in that? So is it psychological? Is it historical? Is it Marxist? Is it, about other works? For instance, is this work talking about other works? Is this poem talking about other poems that we've read before without it being like that? Is it talking about religion, for example? Okay, what is it? So there are so many areas that you can use to approach the work. You could say, is this work philosophical? Is it talking about philosophy? Is it dealing with, key issues that as a country, as a people, we're still questioning? Could it be doing that? Because we have so many questions that we haven't answered. For instance, where are human beings coming from? Why are we here on earth? What are we intended to achieve from being here on earth? Okay, so those could be the questions that you could be dealing with. Okay, so it could be about philosophy, it could be about language, it could be about history, it could be about politics, it could be about any of these. And you notice that a work does not talk about only one thing. It could be about individuals in the text. So a work does not talk about one thing, it talks about so many things. So you need to look at it from all these different angles, then look at how beautiful it is. Okay, so has it been beautifully crafted? And how beautiful is it? What makes it a beautiful piece of work? So we need to ask all those questions. So at every point, as you are reading, see what comes out, okay? See what comes out. I think in the course of the term, I'll ask you people to come back online so that we have a lecture where we read one text together. I would like us to read through very closely together. We'll have maybe 2 hours of reading only one piece of work closely so that we see how we can get there. I think what we have done today has been really running through. We have just been running through trying to get somewhere. So those are the issues that I would like us to take. So now, before I summarize our lecture, I would like to deal with the question of voice and rhyming in the poem. Is the voice and rhyme the same? No, the voice is what we hear. When you read a poem, you can hear someone speaking to you. So the poem speaks to you, okay? It speaks to you. Every time you listen to it, it is speaking to you. It is saying something to you, to the reader, to anyone. That is what the poem does. If, for instance, you know, the poem Sonnet 18 by Shakespeare, that poem, you know, speaks to a lover. It is a love poem. And it's talking about how good, you know, a lover is, how much a lover cannot lose to death. So it says, nor shall death brag thou wanderest in his shade, when in eternal lines to time thou growest. So death does not have power over you. So it's speaking to someone. So that's what happens. The poem speaks to someone. So that which is speaking is the voice. You can hear it. That which we hear is the voice. So it's not you. As you read the poem, it's not you speaking the poem. There is a voice in the poem. And there is a speaker, someone who is saying those things. So they speak and you can hear them through the poem. So someone says it and you hear their voice through the poem. So that's the voice you hear in the poem. You can even tell, you know, how it sounds, whether it's, you know, it's happy or not. You can hear all that in the poem. Now we have less than a minute. I do not know if I'll be able to conclude, but I think I'll just say, let's remember everything that we have talked about. I think you can still go back to all the lectures that we have had. I'll be uploading them on YouTube very soon. After I've uploaded them, I'll send